Hello everyone. Welcome back to Reddit Night. Today's we are talking about cults. Redditors who were raised in cults, when was the first time you realized something was wrong? When my parents told me they'd let me die rather than allow me to get certain medical procedures. When I realized that the doors to the 13-story former hotel building we were all living in was locked and you had to sign out to leave. No one, from children to adults, could leave without an explanation to where they were going and when they'd be back. Edit, group operated under two names. IBLP, Institute for Basic Life Principles. This was their outreach label where they would go to churches and show this seminar to bring new gullible people into the fold. ATI, Advanced Training Institute, was for the people that actually wanted in deep and consisted of an entire homeschool curriculum to make sure your kids got brainwashed correctly. Pretty in-depth interesting article written about the whole thing. They masqueraded as just another Baptist sect, but it went way deeper. My family was highly involved for years, but the year we lived at their training center was actually horrifying. Strictly controlled what was allowed in / out, surveillance for everything. Sad part is most of the families that lived there were essentially slave labor that worked for the ministry and were given free room and board. Many of them had nowhere else to go and were trapped even if they wanted to leave. I was 12 years old and my classmate from school died in a car accident. We were as close of friends as I was allowed to be with someone who wasn't in the cult. I asked my mom if I would see my friend in paradise, afterlife, and she said no because her parents weren't Jehovah's Witnesses. Then and now, I couldn't believe that an innocent 12-year-old wouldn't get a shot at everlasting life because of her parents. It was definitely the biggest crack in my ideology that only grew as I got into my teen years. My aunt and uncle joined a radical sect of the Seventh-day Adventists. Seventh-day Adventists don't allow dancing, cards, chess, checkers and most board games. They can't go to plays, or partake in anything that isn't harmless, but it isn't clear what is holy and what is profane. That means that sports and even watching TV are really unacceptable unless somehow religiously aligned. My cousins were fascinating. Their parents joined the global mission arm and became missionaries, professional, and lived in Argentina, Thailand, and Africa. My cousins would come to North America every so often to see family but were so bizarre because they had no cultural references. They were raised in a cloistered community with little to no outside influence, so they didn't know music, arts, or pop culture. They had never heard most music or even seen a Gilbert and Sullivan play. They would come to us and talk about the church, but there was no way me or my other cousins would give up our lives to live in some quasi-monastic world. Their parents abandoned the church after a number of years and became mainliners, but for a good 7 years, my cousins were like people who had been unfrozen from a glacier and trying to navigate life as interlopers. When I realized I had been running two versions of truth in my head my whole life. One was the empirical, fact-based reality we actually live in, the other was my church's version of that reality. One day, it clicked that both can't be true and I was living a lie. I left and had to reevaluate how I wanted to live my life, and I found my genuine life. I was fortunate to have a spouse who was not a member of my church to support me. My family, not so much. I was raised with the belief that if I followed all the rules and was a good person, I'd feel a confirmation of everything. 7-year-old me was well aware that I had yet to feel it, and that was one of the many things that led to becoming depressed at the age of 12. I kept having questions that I had no answer for other than God works in mysterious ways. Eventually, I found a YouTube channel where the person told about how they left the religion, and I realized my whole life was a lie and that I no longer had to try and believe in something that never worked for me. Recently, I'm 41 years old and kind of had the blindfold pulled that a lot of the evangelical organizations I've worked with in my life have been cults. In my teens we went to a church that told you who you could hang out with, what you could watch on TV, what movies you could see, and picked who within the church you could be friends with. 99% of the leaders told you how to run your family but had kids who were either teenage pregnancies or a baby daddy, illiterate homeschoolers, high school dropouts or drug addicts. There were stretches where we went to church 2 times a day, even during the week. They encouraged people to get their kids out of school for revival meetings, homeschoolers postponed their classes, it was consuming. They started arranged marriages, with several families petitioning my parents for me to marry their daughters. They almost went for it but stopped because it seemed weird. As I moved off to college they recommended a megachurch they got a lot of their messages and such from. This church did more of the same. They encouraged high school seniors to put off college a year and pay the church $3,000 for an opportunity to work there for a year for an internship program that guaranteed ministry work experience. This program micromanaged your life to the hour, Included intense hazing for new members that routinely sent students to the hospital and stacked them all into student housing so that you could focus more on the program. When my brother started asking, politely, how our religion was founded and how our family got involved and generally just questions about life, they don't believe in evolution or kissing before marriage. And they would bite his head off about it. At age 11 it made me realize they were being defensive because they had no answers. If you can't explain why you're in a religion, you get the frick out. Not exactly a cult, but it felt that way. Growing up, I went to the church of my religion, where the sermons were always conducted in the language of my heritage. The Sunday school teachers regularly disparaged other religions and ethnicities. During the week, my parents sent me to an after-school program to learn the language of my heritage, during which the other students regularly trashed other ethnicities, races, religions, etc. They only dated other people of my heritage. In college, the people of my heritage only spoke that language to each other, and looked down on me because I wanted to speak English. Couldn't stand any of this. Ended up marrying outside of my religion and stopped talking to about 99% of the people in my church. Not exactly an organized cult, but I was raised by an esoteric mom. Tarot cards, runes, horoscopes and numerology and so on. I grew up believing in demons and ghosts. My mom kept talking about the dangers of the rituals in the books she read. Of course I was curious about those books and read them anyway. I can't exactly tell what led to my realization. It was more of a long process. In my curiosity I always wanted to find explanations for those things. But every single person in that circle refused to give one and everyone showed a severe disinterest about scientific research. One day I was at a regulars table where people with similar esoteric interests met. It was like talking to children. What seemed weird to me was the general notion of every truth is right. In the esoteric world there is no objectivity. Everything is subjective and therefore everything is right. This collided with everything I've ever learned in school or in the experiments I did. How can more than one thing be right, when only one thing leads to the desired result? The stove is hot whether you believe it or not. This isn't a computer game where you can turn off damage. Also I had trouble believing in magical beings I can't see or detect in any way. I remember my mom scolding me, because I said I don't believe in God, when I was 16. Back then I rather chose to believe in mystical nature, because I was raised with the general notion that you have to believe in something. That led me to something called Asatru, which is kinda like a modernized religion based on Germanic gods. In hindsight it was still ridiculous, but at least those people weren't completely nuts like the esoterics. They were way more tolerant too. Thanks to the internet I finally got out of all that bullshit. It took a few years to process it, but now I'm full-blown atheist. I've found communities with people who thought similar like I did, who had the same skepticism and showed me that I'm not abnormal just because I'm searching for explanations. My first time going through an endowment session at the local Mormon temple, and there are parts of the ceremony where you basically add robes and an apron to what you're already wearing. During the second time of everyone in the room standing and adjust robes according to the part of the ritual we were at, aka doing what we're told to an extreme degree, I paused, looked around, and thought, oh. This is why people think we are a cult. I brushed the thought off because I saw the ceremony as an individual spiritual event, ignoring the fact that we were all dressing and sharing secret handshakes as a group. It's been 19 years since then. I've had to examine and break down a lot of my life, but I've finally written my resignation letter so as to finally leave the church. Every religion is a cult, but some are more obviously cultish than others. I was raised Christian Scientist, sometimes called a cult, and my mom interpreted it to mean no medical treatment, ever. The third time I broke my arm only to have her and others refuse to treat it until forced by my school, first time, and by me sitting in the car and refusing to move until they took me to the hospital, second time, and by me taking the bus alone to the hospital at age 14, third time, to have it casted might have been the moment of clarity for me. And that's after seeing my mom sick in bed for months while she refused treatment for scarlet fever, not to mention me and my sister needing glasses, and dental work. And when I was in my 20s and lost a baby and had major surgery, and was in the hospital for 10 days, she refused to visit since it would be acknowledging sickness. The CS mantra is deny reality. Toward the end of my mom's life I managed to tell her how painful it had been for us kids to not even get a hug and a there, sweetheart, much less a bowl of soup when we were sick. By then she had given up on the CS cult because she had Parkinson's, which is tough to ignore. To her credit, she apologized and said she wished she could go back and change things. Adults can decide to join cults or deny they need medical care, but no one has the right to hurt a child by denying them care. That is it for today. Which story was the most interesting? Tell us in the comments. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next one.